Charity Digital have been working with the NCSC for nearly 3 years now to make the charity sector safer and more secure. Now, we have a small change in speaker from the published agenda today, as owing to circumstances beyond her control, Becca can't join us today. However, I'm delighted to say we have a very able and knowledgeable replacement in Gregory, who's an engagement lead at the NCSC. In this session, Gregory will be talking about a really important aspect of cybersecurity, and that is how you embed security in your organisation's culture. With over a quarter of charities experiencing a breach or an attack in the last quarter, and this actually applies to organisations of all size, this is incredibly important. So I'd like to now invite Gregory to the stage.
Good morning.
Hi, Gregory. Just before I hand over to you, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Recovering from some mild hay fever, but otherwise well, and glad to be here.
I'm delighted you're able to join us as well. Now, just to let our audience know, because the NCSC is part of GCHQ, for security reasons, Gregory is going to be keeping his camera off today. But that's all. I'm going to hand over to Gregory, so take it away.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. And hopefully I will start by sharing my screen successfully. Excellent. Well, as I said, it's a pleasure to be here today. And as hopefully some of you will have heard already, the NCSC's objective overall is to help to make the UK the safest place to live and work online. And to that end, we provide and maintain and update quite a range of guidance and products for all sorts of organisations, not least charities. And Becca's charity team, of which I am not normally part, but I'm just standing in for today, is responsible for helping to raise awareness and increasing resilience in the charity sector. So today, we're going to take a quick look at our Board Toolkit, which is a comprehensive guide to empower trustees and board members to take responsibility for their charity's cyber resilience. And we're just going to have a look at the first section of that guidance and, as Jonathan mentioned, integrating cybersecurity into your charity's structure and objectives. And excellent. So a quick note on terminology. The Board Toolkit as a whole is written with general private sector terminology in mind. So it refers to board members, customers, and users, with the exception of this slide, which does have both donors, beneficiaries. So I'm just going to stick to the words on the slides. I realize that terminology might not apply directly to your area, and my apologies for this. Just help me not have to swap words on the fly. So why should you care as a board member about cybersecurity? So firstly, the world has changed in the last 20 years, and the vast majority of organizations and now charities rely on digital technology to function, and that has increased even more so into the COVID pandemic. Working patterns that were commonplace before in the office, where paper was a very practical way of doing some things, are no longer particularly practical when everybody's working from home. Secondly, cybersecurity protects the ability to function that relies on that digital technology that we now use in all aspects, or almost all aspects, depending on your individual circumstances. Cybersecurity protects that so you can continue to support your beneficiaries. So cybersecurity is essential to your charity's health and resilience, and as such, that makes it the responsibility and interest of the boards to make sure that happens. Jonathan mentioned that 26% of organizations and charities experienced a cybersecurity breach or attack in the last 12 months. How would that impact your charity? And finally, there is an increased expectation of cybersecurity. Some of that's regulatory, in as much as GDPR places strong requirements on your organization to protect data, but also public perception of your organization is important. And so it's really very important that you as an organization and you as a board member, as someone who's a leading position in your organization, to make changes to get to grips with cybersecurity. And our statistic for the day from the Cybersecurity Breaches Survey in 2021, which is available online, I'm sure we can arrange the link to be distributed if there's further reading desired, is that while 68% of charity boards felt that cybersecurity should be a priority, only 35% have trustees or senior managers with a cybersecurity brief. So there's a real gap there. And the Board Toolkit that NCSC have produced aims to step boldly into that gap and arm you with the knowledge and the right questions to take a confident, informed approach to cybersecurity. Let's go on to our next slide. So, why have we done this? What does it do? The first thing is to help the boards just get a little bit technical. We're not expecting anybody, well, we're not expecting board members to suddenly become cybersecurity experts overnight. That's unrealistic. But in order to understand and make informed decisions on cybersecurity, you need to know a little bit. Compare finance, for example. Whilst it would be great if you happen to have an accounting background to be able to make finance decisions in your board, you don't need one. You just need to understand some of the basics so you can ask questions and receive answers, and then understand the answers enough to make intelligent and informed decisions upon them. And we also want to help you speak to your cybersecurity experts. We understand there's a gap between the board and the people right at the bottom actually doing the cybersecurity, if you will. And as I referred to in the previous one, if you can't communicate effectively with each other, then there's going to be a breakdown in understanding, and consequently your decision making will suffer as a result. And you also need to know what questions to ask. We understand also that cybersecurity can be quite an imposing field as you look at it from the outside, but if you ask the right questions to your cybersecurity people, who hopefully we can encourage a good relationship with through the Board Toolkit, then you can get good answers, and good answers can let you protect your charity. So we're going to have a look at the first section of the Board Toolkit, just quite briefly today, because we don't have very long, and that is embedding cybersecurity into your structure and objectives. So the role of cybersecurity overall is to enable your objectives as an organization, and it should be adding value rather than taking it away. So given that cybersecurity is going to impact on the whole of your organization, it relies on the technology that you use everywhere in your organization. And so when we think about cybersecurity, we need to think about all the different types of risk. So for example, operational risk is going to be impacted by cybersecurity because we're going to rely on the security of digital services like email, online storage, software as a service offerings that you consume, and the list could go on for a long way. And similarly, some legal risk. You are likely to have taken some contracts with suppliers or partners that put a requirement on you to protect and handle data in certain ways. And also regulatory requirements like GDPR and data protection that also require you in the strongest terms to take certain actions. Cyber risk feeds into legal risk. And finally, it also feeds into financial risk. Cybercrime is a growing and very vigorous field, as hopefully you will have seen on the news for a number of organizations over the past year and onwards. Ransomware is very much an active theme of discussion at the moment. And so if your organization is at risk of losing money to fraud enabled by cyber or loss of takings, or this is one of the areas where the terminology is written towards private sector organizations. The Board Toolkit refers to sort of loss of revenue, which doesn't apply literally, but figuratively in the circumstance no less. So all three of operational, legal, and financial risk are impacted. And with good cybersecurity, you can mitigate a lot of that risk and also give yourself some space to innovate. Whereas if you're overly cautious, just as with financial, operational, and legal risk, if you're overly cautious, then you can miss opportunities. So it bears a lot of resemblance to the other areas of risk that your organization is possibly more used to handling. And also, cybersecurity needs to be integrated into your whole organization. It's not just about having good technology, but you also need to have good people to manage that technology, and you need to have a good relationship with those people, and you also need to have processes in place across an organization. For example, in order to protect against an attacker who's trying to access some of your sensitive data, you're going to need a good technical solution to store the data, but also appropriate training for staff to handle that data, and a process for managing the movement of staff and aligned with access management. So there's lots of, it's not just we need the technology. You also need to have people who are trained to use it, trained to recognize unusual circumstances, for example, phishing campaigns. It's a cohesive look at cybersecurity is definitely the best way to do it. And next we have, don't leave it to one member of the board. So you will probably have a chief information security officer, or a role that's very similar to that, it's chief technology officer, something similar. You don't want that person to report to somebody who reports to the board necessarily. You will recall in our previous slide, we refer to the different aspects of risk that cyber covers or it impacts upon. Because cyber impacts upon these all aspects of your business risk, if your chief cyber person is reporting into a specific stream within your board, then that might hinder your ability to look at cyber in the broadest possible boundaries. If cyber is only flowing in through your organizational risk pipeline, if you will, then there's a possibility you might not observe some of the legal risk. And so consequently, we usually advise that your CISO, your Chief Information Security Officer, reports directly to the board and comes straight to you as a group, so that everybody can understand the insights and the difficulties and the opportunities that that offers. And that also requires that all of the board are capable of understanding cyber matters in some measure. Again, we're not expecting you to be experts, but it is essential that you can understand some of the considerations that they put before you. It's obviously their job to deal with the details and then provide you with insights which you can make informed decisions upon. So a few key questions for you to consider. As a board, do we understand how cybersecurity impacts upon our individual and collective responsibilities? I'm just going to whiz through these. Does every board member have enough expertise to understand the potential impact and value of cybersecurity? If the answer is no, the Board Toolkit is an excellent place to start. There's also plenty of resources available, not least from NCSC. I would do a quick plug for our Exercise in a Box tool, so that if you don't really understand what it would be like to have your organization suffer a cyber attack, Exercise in a Box is a great place to start. Is there someone responsible for delivering the organization's cybersecurity? We've touched on this a little bit already. If there isn't, then that's a very good place to start, so that there's somebody whose dedicated role it is to protect and manage this risk. And finally, who is responsible for oversight of security? Ideally, this would be the board as a whole, but not necessarily. And finally, have we been clear about what information both the board and our wider stakeholders need, or beneficiaries, donors, or trustees, as you prefer? So you will want certain measures of cybersecurity from your CISO and their function. You might, for example, like a summary of what sort of risks you are best and worst prepared against. For example, how well prepared are we against a potential ransomware attack, or how are we doing against phishing, or how much money do we expect to spend on cyber, and what would be differential if we spent a given fraction more? There's what you actually want from your cyber people is going to vary by your circumstances, so I can't prescribe anything, even if I did want to. But the process is that you think about it and then you ask for it. That's the way to start building the relationship between the board and the cyber people in your organization. So I think we've just got a few more things to think about. I'm aware that I haven't got much time left, so we won't linger over much before we get to the Q&A. So who has responsibility for cybersecurity? So a single person or a function like an audit committee? How do they engage with the board? Do they report directly? Do they fit in with another reporting process? We'd encourage, as we said, a direct process, a direct report to the board, but again, your circumstances might find that differently. If you had a risk committee, maybe it would be appropriate for them to report, for the CISO to report directly to there, for example. And does this, whatever process it is that you have arranged, does this encourage the boards to actively participate in discussions on cybersecurity? The whole objective of the Board Toolkit is to get you as board members involved. If your process doesn't encourage that, then you might want to look at it again. What was their objective? And who sets them? Is it the board setting the overall cyber objectives of the organization and the individual's objectives? And how do these tie in with their work and the overall objectives? And do they have access to all the people they need to ensure effective cybersecurity? So you will recall previously that I said that it's not just about technology. Your cyber people will probably need to have some working processes with your human resources and your policy and your finance teams, because cyber risk falls into all of those areas. You need to protect the information of the personal information of your staff. Your policies are going to be able to enforce cyber risk prevention measures in some places, and finance, as we mentioned, also is a consideration. So I'm going to skip this slide in the interests of time and go on to this one here. So, do we have a process that ensures cyber risk is integrated with business risk? So, risk is all about balancing different options, as I don't need to tell you. So if we consider, for example, a bring your own device policy, the type of which you as an organization may have done at the beginning of the pandemic, when suddenly all of your well-established business processes need to be changed rather rapidly. For example, let's take a situation where all of your staff used to work in offices and they had desk phones, and then they had to work from home and they no longer had phones. Perhaps you didn't issue organizational mobile devices. This is not an uncommon circumstance, I understand. And so you're considering, do we want to allow our staff to use their own mobile devices and access organizational data from their own mobile devices? I think that's telling me I'm running out of time. So I shall be brief. So there's lots of considerations. There's an increase in risk from the number of devices that you've got on your network, and that you're not necessarily in control of them. But you also need to continue your business. How do you manage the potential loss of information via a mobile device? It's much easier to copy data off a phone and get it out of the network than it is than an unmanaged phone than it is from one of your organizational devices. Did you compare other options that are on the table? For example, corporately owned, personally enabled phones, but that would be a financial risk as well, because you would have to suddenly shell out for a large number of mobile devices, some of which you might not get back. I've skimmed through this rather quickly, but hopefully it's just given you a little thought about how the decisions that you make for cyber risk integrate with your decisions elsewhere in the business as well, and how, if you manage them correctly, you can get the best of all available worlds. So I have run out of time, so I'm going to stop there. So I would very much encourage you to have a look at the Board Toolkit and some of our other NCSE resources. Mimi will be able to, and the host and the organisers for this excellent event are going to be able to send around the slides, so you should receive them shortly, along with some links to our other resources. And if you do have any questions, then please do get in touch with Becca or any of the charities team or me, and we'll be happy to help as best we can. And I think Chris has come in to run the Q&A with me.
I have indeed, Gregory. Thank you very much for that. And yes, we will be sending out the board kit to everybody after that so they can read at their own leisure. Thanks very much for that, Gregory. Really insightful. And I know we're a bit strapped for time, but we've got some questions here for you as well. First, a really good question from David to kick us off. He says, ignorance is bliss. Any tips on getting board members to want to know about cybersecurity?
A very good one. I think the best way is to make them understand why they should want to know about it, in as much as it represents a risk. I think scare stories are quite a good way of doing this. Finding examples of when organizations have been horribly hit by cyber attacks is a good way to sort of focus the attention. And there's a going phrase in NCSE that the best selling point for cyber is having been attacked already. So obviously we don't want you to be attacked, but understanding that the risks are there and that they can be managed with not very much effort is, I think, a good place to start.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. David, we actually ran a webinar back in January because we ourselves were hit by a cyber attack. And while we don't hold any sort of sensitive data on people, a lot of charities do. So it might be worth having a look at that. It's just proof that it really can happen to anyone, even people as cyber conscious as ourselves who've got the relevant tech and software and strategies in place. So like Gregory says, yeah, find some really pertinent examples. There's a few out there. We do cover a lot in our content as well. Next question from Tanya. Our IT is outsourced. Are there additional precautions we need to consider in terms of risk and responsibility?
Yes, it's going to depend very much on the individual arrangements you've got. But as a starting place, I would recommend that you understand where your responsibility starts and theirs ends, and vice versa. Who is responsible for access control, for example? Who is responsible for I don't know, changes at a given level? We also have the an NCSE resource called the Cloud Security Principles, which might be overkill for this particular question, but give sort of helpful ways of starting to think about how you assess services that you don't run and own. And also, but on the other hand, outsourced IT represents a different risk in as much as you don't control it. And so you're removing one risk by avoiding you having to do it yourself, but it's also now outside of your hands. So at some point you have to take their assurance that they are doing the things that they say they're going to. So I think that's a question that we could chat about for quite a long time.
Sounds like a session within itself, so we'll have to earmark that for next time. I did think the police siren in the background was very apt for a discussion of of cybersecurity, by the way. That tickled me a little bit. Moving on to the next question from Christopher Brown. I think this is a really good question. Does cybersecurity solely sit with IT teams as the experts? For example, our organization has one IT manager, but with many people using digital tools, there's much more possibilities of a breach.
I'm going to pin my colours to the mast and say absolutely not. So the cybersecurity people are obviously who are going to actually implement the controls, but everybody in your organization is responsible for cyber security. Phishing is the prominent example of this. There's only, I don't recall the exact stat, but before about 2019, the majority of all ransomware cases successful ransomware attacks had as their sort of medium of getting to people phishing attacks, where they send a very plausible email and then download something to your network, and away we go. And so without good staff training, good staff understanding of a good cybersecurity culture throughout your organization, then it's so much harder to be secure. There's a particularly interesting blog post by one of our directors, Ian Levy, about how somebody tried to cyber spoof him, and which is worth looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to say something else, but I've forgotten. So
no worries. I think I remember reading somewhere from the ICO, we concluded this. I think it's over half of all cyber attacks on the charity sector are phishing attacks. Mm-hmm. Which is incredible when you think about it. So, yeah, it really does affect everyone. That was a perfect answer. We're going to finish very quickly on one last question. From an organization level, what's the best practice way of sharing best practice consistently? Experts might not always have the time to train. How can cybersecurity leaders within organizations make sure people are up to date with relevant information?
These are good questions. I think the best way is to do a small amount of training consistently. There's a number of sort of small, consistent training packages, sort of 5 minutes once a month. I think NCSC offers a very, very basic one as well. I agree that you're going to have difficulty necessarily finding the time from your experts to train everybody all the time. So consistent staff training to sort of teach and reinforce, I think, is probably the best and most productive way of doing it initially.
Brilliant. And I'd be remiss not to say, Christopher, for asking that question, read Charity Digital. we're always adding the latest cybersecurity information and our thought leadership pieces around what we believe organizations should be doing to protect themselves and how they can protect themselves. So I would definitely be pushing us as a source of truth for the rest of your team. That's all we got time for. Sorry if we never got round to your question, but please do go join Gregory in the networking hall, find his table and do have a chat. Thank you very much, Gregory. That was great.
My pleasure.
Great presentation. Thanks for joining us today.